The chandeliers burned cold and bright that night. Every crystal drop caught the light and threw it back across the hall, like 1,000 watching eyes. Serafina Morrow stood near the arched entrance of Ashvale Court, her midnight blue gown brushing the marble floor, her hands folded quietly in front of her, the way they always were when she was holding herself together from the inside. She did not look nervous. She had worked very hard to make sure she did not look nervous. But she was, because tonight was the moon ball, and tonight her mate was supposed to claim her. The moon ball only came once every 7 years. It was the oldest tradition in the Wolf Court, a night when fated bonds were honored publicly, when names were called beneath the ceremonial arch, when the sacred claiming words were spoken and sealed before witnesses, before elders, before the gods of the old moon themselves. It was the night she had waited for since she was 16 years old, and the first caught his scent across a crowded market square. Warm cedar and winter rain, a smell she had never been able to shake from her memory, no matter how many seasons passed. Bastion Crow, her mate, he stood beneath the ceremonial arch now, tall and handsome in his dark formal coat, and she watched him from across the hall, the way she had always watched him, quietly, patiently, with her heart sitting very still in her chest. He had not looked at her once since she arrived. She told herself that was fine. She told herself he was nervous too. She told herself the same thing she always told herself. The bell rang 3 times. The hall fell completely silent. And then, in a voice that carried clear and cold to every corner of the room, Bastion Crow looked up, not at her, but at the court. And he dissolved their bond. Right there, in front of everyone, in front of the candles and the chandeliers and 400 witnesses. He spoke the severing words without flinching, without looking at her once. And just like that, the thread that had lived in her chest for 6 years, the warm, stubborn, quiet thing she had protected through poverty and silence and hope, snapped. She felt it go. She did not make a sound. She stood very still, her hands still folded in front of her, and she did not make a single sound. And that stillness is what caught the attention of the 3 most dangerous men in the room. Before we go further, I want to ask something of you. If you have ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by someone who never deserved you, this story is for you. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell right now. Not for us. For the next time you need a story that reminds you what you are worth. It takes 3 seconds. It costs nothing. And it means everything. Drop your city or country in the comments. We want to know where in the world you are watching from. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story. 3 days before the moon ball, Serafina Morrow did not have a dress. She had a sister, though, and that turned out to be enough. Juniper Morrow was 23 years old and had been sewing since she was 9, learning the trade from their late mother who used to sit by the only window in their house and work by the light until her fingers ached. Juniper had inherited both the skill and the stubbornness. When she decided something was going to happen, it happened. She had been collecting scraps of deep blue silk for almost a year. Not buying them, collecting them. A quarter yard from a discarded noble order here, a wide strip from a torn ceremony curtain there, a length of embroidered sheer fabric she had traded a full week's worth of baked goods to obtain from a seamstress in the lower market. Serafina had not known any of this until she came home one evening to find her sister bent over the table at midnight, her needle moving through silk by candlelight, her eyes red from hours of careful work. "Juniper," she stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?"
"Getting you ready,"
her sister said, without looking up. Sit down. I need to measure your shoulders again. Serafina sat. She watched her sister work. She did not say anything about the dark circles under Juniper's eyes, or the small cut on her left index finger wrapped in linen, or the way her hands moved even when she paused, the unconscious motion of someone who had been sewing so long, her hands no longer stopped on their own. You did not have to do this, Serafina said finally. No, Juniper agreed pleasantly. I wanted to. There is a difference. The gown she built over 3 sleepless nights was nothing like the elaborate creations the noble women would wear. It did not have cascading layers or embroidered gold thread or fine pearl buttons down the back. What it had was something harder to manufacture: intention. The midnight blue silk fell cleanly off the shoulders, and just enough to be graceful without being cold. The bodice was fitted and embroidered in dark silver thread, small, precise patterns that caught the light only if you were standing close enough to look. The skirt moved like water, layered sheer fabric floating over the heavier silk beneath, giving the whole thing a softness that made it look less like a dress and more like something you might see at the edge of a dream. Serafina stood in front of the small mirror in their room the morning of the ball and looked at herself for a long time. She was not a wealthy woman. Everyone in Ashvale knew that. The Morrow family had fallen from modest standing years ago when their father's debts finally caught up with his pride, and what was left was a small house in the lower quarter, a surviving garden, 2 daughters, and the collective decision to hold themselves with dignity no matter what. She did not look wealthy in the mirror, but she looked like herself. Fully, clearly herself. And for one brief moment, standing in Juniper's crafted dress, with her dark hair falling loose over her shoulders, she let herself believe that tonight would be everything she had waited for. You look extraordinary, Juniper said from behind her. Serafina turned. Her sister was leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with that particular expression, proud and careful at the same time, like someone who had given everything they had and was now simply hoping it would be enough. Thank you, Serafina said, and she meant it in every language she knew. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what the moon ball actually is. It is not a party. The word ball is misleading. It makes it sound like dancing and champagne and pleasant conversation. There is some of that. But at its center, the moon ball is a sacred ceremony, one of the oldest rituals still practiced in Wolf Court tradition, and it carries a weight that no amount of silk or candlelight can fully disguise. The tradition began before written records, in the time when wolf packs still governed by open forest law, and the moon was their only calendar. The claiming ceremony, the public declaration of a fated mate bond, was considered the most important act a wolf could perform in their lifetime. Not the battle victories, not the political alliances, not the accumulated land or titles, the claiming. Because in the old understanding, your mate was your balance, the person the moon herself had chosen to complete your specific frequency. The severing of that bond, or the refusal of it, was considered a kind of violence, not against the person, against the order of things. Over centuries, as wolf society became more structured, more political, more concerned with bloodlines and alliances than with ancient bonds, the ceremony was formalized. The moon ball became the official venue for public claims. Elders presided. A high announcer recorded each bond. The arch was built from moonstone and silver oak, carved with the old language, and no wolf could stand beneath it and speak false claiming words without the moon knowing. But neither could she stop them from speaking false severing words. That loophole had always existed. In theory, A fated bond could only be dissolved if both wolves agreed. In practice, if one wolf stood beneath the arch and spoke the severing words clearly and with intent, the bond would unravel regardless, leaving the other wolf with a ghost of something that had lived in their chest and was now simply gone. The court knew this. The elders knew this. The wolves who attended the moon ball year after year knew this. What nobody ever spoke aloud was the understanding that severing a fated bond publicly, before the court, before 400 witnesses, before the arch carved in the old language, that was not just a personal decision. It was a statement. It said, "I looked at what the moon gave me, and I chose something else instead." And the court, with all its breeding and titles and political memory, would never forget that you said it. She had known something was wrong for 3 weeks before the ball. It was not anything he said. Bastion Crow was not a man who said very much to her at all. And in the years since they had discovered their bond, she had learned to read him in the spaces between words. The way he looked at her when she arrived somewhere. The temperature of his attention when other people were around. The slight shift in posture that meant he was about to pull back before she could get too close. He had been pulling back for 3 weeks. She had been telling herself it was the pressure of the upcoming ball, his family's expectations, the political season in Ashvale Court, which was always complicated and always left him quieter than usual. She had been very good at telling herself reasonable things. The last time she saw him before the night of the ball, he had come to the lower quarter market on some unnamed errand and found her there, buying herbs. They had stood together for perhaps 4 minutes. He had been polite, careful. The way you are careful with something you are planning to put down. "You should wear something elegant tomorrow night," he said, at the end of the 4 minutes, just before he turned to leave. Not a compliment, an instruction. She looked at him. "I intend to," she said. He nodded and left, and she stood in the market with her bundle of herbs and watched him go and understood, in the part of herself that had always known things she refused to say aloud, that something had already been decided. She simply did not know exactly what. Now she did. The Moonball Hall smelled of candle wax and expensive perfume, and the particular nervous anticipation of 400 wolves all waiting for the same ceremonial moment. Serafina stood at the edge of the marble floor and watched Bastion from across the room. He was surrounded by his family. His mother, Lady Verena Crow, in silver and diamonds, her expression composed in the specific way of women who have decided something and made their peace with it. His father, Lord Cassian Crow, broad and silver-haired and speaking quietly to Elder Malus in a corner. And at Bastion's side, just slightly too close for a woman who was not his mate, was Isolde Ashwood, daughter of the Ashwood Pack, one of the oldest political bloodlines in the Southern Territory. Beautiful in the way that power always made things look beautiful, effortless, certain, how expensive. Serafina looked at the 3 of them, Bastion, Isolde, Lady Verena, and the shape of the evening assembled itself in her mind with brutal clarity. She did not leave. Some part of her thought about it. A very practical, self-preserving part of her said, quietly, "You could go now, before the bell rings, before any of this becomes public, and no one would have to see your face when it happens." She stayed, not out of hope. She had run out of that. She stayed because she refused to give any of them the satisfaction of her absence. If this was going to happen, it was going to happen while she was standing straight with her chin level and her hands folded and her midnight blue gown catching the light. The bell rang. The ceremonial arch at Ashvale Court was older than anyone in the room, carved from silver oak and faced with polished moonstone. It stood at the center of the hall, flanked by two tall white candles and presided over by Elder Melis, who was herself older than most people wanted to think about. She was a small woman with white hair and eyes that were still sharp enough to make younger wolves look away when she turned them in their direction. She had overseen more moonballs than anyone living and had seen more public declarations of bonds made and bonds broken than any other living elder in the wolf court. She was watching Bastion Crow very carefully as he stepped beneath the arch. The hall had gone quiet in the way that only happens when 400 people decide simultaneously to stop breathing. Serafina stood at the edge of the floor. She had not moved from the spot she had chosen when she arrived. She was aware of people watching her. A few faces turned in her direction, already anticipating, some with pity and some with the particular hungry attention of people who enjoy witnessing difficult moments in other people's lives. She kept her eyes on Bastion. He looked at the court. His voice, when he spoke, was level, practiced. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this, who had said these words in front of a mirror or a trusted advisor until they came out smooth. By the laws of this court and the tradition of this hall, I stand beneath the arch to speak my truth before the moon and her witnesses. A murmur moved through the crowd. Serafina did not move. I declare the dissolution of the fated bond between Bastion Crow of House Crow and Serafina Morrow of the lower quarter. The bond is severed. The claim is withdrawn. My intent is my own. And then, because Bastion Crow was nothing if not thorough, he turned. He looked directly at Isolde Ashwood, who had positioned herself just outside the arch. And in its place, I declare my choice for the woman I would claim by will, Isolde of House Ashwood. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then the court erupted, not in outrage, in conversation. The low electric buzz of 400 wolves all turning to the person beside them to say, "Did you see that? Did you expect that? What does it mean for the crows? What does it mean for the Morrow girl?" And Serafina stood in the middle of all of it, like the eye of something she had not chosen and could not stop. She felt the bond go. She had already described it once, the snap, the disappearance of the warm thread. What she had not expected was the cold that followed it. Not grief, exactly. More like stepping outside in winter without a coat. And understanding for the first time that you had been relying on a warmth you had not fully noticed until it was gone. She breathed through it, one breath and then another. She did not cry. She did not move toward him. She did not do any of the things that the watching court might have expected, might have hoped to see. The begging, the breaking, the undignified spectacle of a woman collapsing under humiliation. She stood exactly where she was, and she breathed. From across the hall, 3 men watched her do it. The first thing she did was look at Elder Melis. The old woman was watching her. Not with pity. Elder Melis did not traffic in pity. She was watching her with something else, something that Serafina could not quite name, but that felt unexpectedly like respect. Their eyes met across the ceremonial arch. Elder Melis gave the smallest, briefest nod. So small that if you were not looking for it, you would miss it entirely. But Serafina was looking, and she caught it, and something in her straightened a little further because of it. She turned. She moved toward the edge of the hall, not hurrying, not shrinking, just walking with the measured pace of a woman who had decided exactly what she was doing. The crowd shifted around her. Some people stepped back to let her pass. Some stared. A few had the decency to look away. She heard, as she moved, the sound of Lady Verena Crow saying something in a low, satisfied voice. She did not listen to the words. They were not for her. She thought about Juniper, at home, who had worked 3 sleepless nights to make her this dress. She thought about her mother, who had died when Serafina was 14, and who had told her once, in the matter-of-fact way she had of delivering important truths, that dignity was not something anyone could give you. It was something you carried yourself, and the only way to lose it was to put it down. Her mother had kept hers until the very end. Serafina intended to do the same. She was approaching the main corridor when she became aware that the texture of the crowd around her had changed. There were fewer people ahead of her now. Or rather, there were 3 people ahead of her who were not moving, and the crowd had naturally parted around them in the way a river parts around stone. She stopped. She had seen the Nightborn brothers from a distance before. Everyone in Ashvale Court had. You could not attend any formal event in the Southern Wolf territory and not know who they were. The twin alphas of the Nightborn dynasty, Heroine and Leander, flanking their older brother, Alaric Nightborn, the Alpha King, who ruled the most powerful wolf house in 4 territories, and who was currently standing in the middle of the exit corridor, with his hands clasped behind his back and his dark gaze fixed on her with an expression she could not read. She looked at all 3 of them. They were tall, all 3, and built in the way of men who did not need to announce their strength, because it was simply apparent in every line of them. They wore the Nightborn ceremonial black, long structured coats with shoulder detail in dark silver, fitted and precise, the kind of clothing that said, "This is not decoration. This is armor we chose." Their faces were striking and serious, and none of them were smiling. Heroine, on the left, watched her with an intensity that felt almost protective, as if he had already decided something. Leander, on the right, watched her with something sharper in his eyes. Analytical, curious. And Alaric stood between them and simply looked at her the way the sea looks at the shore, patient, enormous, and completely certain of its own depth. None of them moved to let her pass. She held herself very still and waited. Heroine spoke first, which surprised her. He was the quieter of the 2 twins. She had heard that from the few whispered court conversations she had caught about the Nightborn brothers. And yet it was his voice that reached her first. "You did not beg," he said. It was not a compliment exactly. It sounded more like the noting of a fact. Serafina looked at him steadily. "No," she said. "I did not." "You should have," Leander said from her right, and his voice was warmer than his brother's, edged with something that might have been dry amusement. "That is what the court expected. You denied them their scene." "I know," she said. "That was intentional." A brief silence. Alaric had still not spoken. He was watching her with those deep, still eyes, and the weight of his attention was not aggressive. It was simply thorough. She had the distinct feeling of being seen completely, and it was both more comfortable and more unsettling than she expected. "Your name is Serafina Morrow," Alaric said. His voice was quieter than she expected for a man of his standing, deliberate. "It is. We know your family name," Alaric continued. "More specifically, we know your mother's family name, the one she stopped using before you were born." Serafina went still in a different way now. Not the controlled stillness of someone holding herself together. The stillness of someone who has heard something she was not prepared for. "My mother did not speak of her family," she said carefully. "She had her reasons," Alaric said. His expression did not change. "So did we, in not approaching you before tonight. But some circumstances change what is appropriate to wait for." He glanced, almost imperceptibly, back toward the hall she had just left. The faint sound of the court reforming itself after its shock still carried through the corridor. "What do you want?" she asked. She was not rude about it. She was simply very tired, and she had learned that direct questions saved everyone time. Alaric looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. "We want," he said carefully, "to have a conversation. Tonight, if you are willing, not here." She studied him. Then she studied his brothers in turn. Evren's quiet watchfulness, Leander's contained intelligence, and she made the calculation that she was making constantly, had always made, would apparently always have to make. Who was safe? What was true? What was the right thing to do next? "All right," she said, "a conversation." She was not agreeing to anything else, but she was agreeing to that. And she walked forward, and the three nightborn men turned and walked with her, and the court that had watched her humiliation now watched something entirely different, and did not yet know what to make of it. The private antechamber off the main corridor was used by the court for quiet negotiations. Neutral ground, firelit, lined with bookshelves that no one ever read. A round table, 4 chairs, a window that looked out over the Ashvale Gardens in the dark. Seraphina sat in one of the chairs. Alaric sat across from her. Evren stood near the window. Leander leaned against the bookshelf with his arms crossed, and his expression calculating in a way that felt less threatening than it looked. Nobody offered her tea or wine or any of the pleasantries. She was grateful for that. "Before you explain," she said, "I want to know one thing. How long have you known who I am?" "Long enough that tonight was not a surprise to us," Alaric said. "Meaning?" He took a breath. "Meaning we have known about your mother's bloodline for 2 years. Meaning we have been watching the Crow family's behavior toward you for 6 months. And meaning," he said, "that we did not interfere before tonight, because it was not yet our place to interfere. Your bond with Crow was a private matter, until he made it a public one." She held that. "And now that he has made it public?" Leander answered this time. "Now it becomes a matter of court record. An unclaimed wolf from a significant bloodline, publicly severed, politically vulnerable, which means other houses will move quickly to leverage that position. The Crows know this. It is, in fact, part of what they were counting on." Seraphina frowned. "They severed the bond to make me vulnerable?" "They severed the bond because they were afraid of what you would become if it was ever sealed," Evren said, from the window. He had not moved. No, but his voice was certain. "A mate bond, sealed at the moon ball between a crow and a woman with your bloodline, would have given you equal standing in his house, full political rights, access to his family's history. And if that bloodline was ever officially recognized." "They could not control the outcome," Seraphina said slowly. Silence. She sat with that for a moment, the understanding settling over her, not like cold water, but like early light, uncomfortable, clarifying, impossible to unsee. She had spent 6 years being patient, being quiet, being everything that would not alarm his family. She had made herself small in all the ways that he had, without ever saying it directly, suggested she make herself small. She had believed, she had genuinely, earnestly believed, that the bond was the thing, that the moon's choice was enough, that love, in its purest form, would outlast whatever the Crows had planned. She had been wrong. Not about the bond. The bond had been real. She had felt it. She still felt the absence of it. She had been wrong about what her patients communicated to the people who were afraid of her. She had been patient. They had been strategic. "What is my mother's bloodline?" she asked. Her voice was even, Alaric held her gaze. Morrow is a trade name, he said. Your mother's family name was Cauldron. It is a name that has not been active in Wolf Court records for 31 years. But it belongs to the original lunar bloodline of the Ashvale founding pack, which makes you, Seraphina, not simply an unallied wolf from the lower quarter. He paused. It makes you eligible by blood, right to a seat on the Ashvale High Court. She needed a moment. They gave her one. She stood at the window in the antechamber and looked out at the dark gardens and breathed with intention, the way Juniper had taught her to breathe when she was young and anxious, long and slow, filling the bottom of her lungs first before the top. Her mother had been a cauldron. Her mother, who had sold herbs from their garden and taught her daughters to hold their heads up even when they had nothing, who had kept every secret about her own family so completely that not even her daughters had known there was a secret to keep. She must have had her reasons. Seraphina turned that truth over in her mind, not bitterly, not with the particular grief that could so easily become resentment. Her mother had made her choices. Seraphina would make hers. She turned back to the room. All three men were watching her with the same careful attention, waiting. I would like to return to the hall, she said. Alaric raised an eyebrow fractionally. There is nothing more tonight that requires your presence there. Perhaps not, she said, but there is something that requires theirs, and I want to be present for it. Another brief silence. Then Leander's mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but close. She wants to be in the room when it happens, he said to his brothers. And there was something appreciative in his voice. I like her. Everin said nothing, but he moved from the window to the door and held it open. The four of them returned to the hall. What happened next was the result of two things occurring simultaneously. The first was that Alaric Nightborn, Alpha King of the Southern Territory. I walked back into the Ashvale Court Moonball with Seraphina Morrow at his side and his twin brothers flanking her, and took up a position near the ceremonial arch with the quiet inevitability of someone who had decided something and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment to say so. The second was that Bastion Crow saw them. Lady Verena saw them too. Her expression, which had been composed and satisfied, shifted into something tighter. She said something sharply to her son. Bastion's face, which had been performing the carefully managed expression of a man who had done a difficult thing he had decided was necessary, began to show its first fracture, because the Nightborn dynasty did not attend moonballs casually. They did not stand beside unclaimed wolves casually. They did not flank women near the ceremonial arch for any reason other than the one that was now becoming apparent to every politically aware wolf in the room. The buzzing of the court was different now. Not the buzz of scandal, the buzz of witnessing something shift. Elder Malus, who had remained near the arch through all of it, turned and watched the Nightborn's approach with those ancient, sharp eyes. And when Alaric Nightborn met her gaze across the room, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or agreement. And the old woman stepped aside to allow him space at the arch. Bastion Crow said too loudly, "What is this?" Nobody answered him. The room did not answer him. The room was watching Alaric Nightborn, and Alaric Nightborn was looking at Seraphina. In the tradition of the moon ball, only one formal claim could be made per person per ceremony. Bastion had used his. But there was another provision in the old law, older than the formal claiming tradition, older than the ceremonial arch itself, that allowed an alpha of sufficiently recognized standing to request acknowledgement of interest before the court. Not a claim, a declaration of intent, something that had not been invoked at a moon ball in living memory, because it required both the alpha and the acknowledged person to stand willingly at the arch together. Elder Malus knew this provision. She had known every provision of every law this court had ever held. She turned to Seraphina. The right of acknowledged interest may be declared at this arch tonight, if both parties consent. It is not a claim. It carries no obligation. But it is witnessed, and it is recorded, and it carries the full social and political weight of a public declaration before this court. She paused. Do you understand what is being offered? Seraphina looked at the old woman. I understand. Do you consent to stand at this arch? Seraphina was aware of the entire room watching her. She was aware of Bastion's eyes on her back, burning with something she had no interest in turning around to examine. She was aware of Juniper, who was not in this room, but who was at home right now, probably awake, probably waiting, probably proud of her sister, no matter what happened. I consent, she said. She stepped forward to the arch. Alaric stepped forward beside her. And Everin and Leander, in a move that was clearly deliberate, clearly rehearsed, took positions at the edge of the arch on either side, not beneath it, but flanking it, witnesses and protectors in one gesture. Elder Malus looked at Alaric. Your declaration, Alpha King. His voice when he spoke was not loud. It did not need to be. The room had gone so quiet that everyone heard him clearly, even in the back of the hall. I, Alaric of House Nightborn, declare before this court and this moon my acknowledged interest in Seraphina Morrow, known also by the bloodline name of Cauldron. I declare this not as obligation or political arrangement, but as intention and respect. I declare this so that every house in this room understands her standing, her worth, and the consequence of treating her as anything less than what she is. He looked at her. With your permission. She looked back at him. She looked at this man, this serious, deliberate, and impossibly composed man who had apparently known about her for 2 years and had chosen tonight, specifically tonight, to say so. And she made the decision she had been moving toward since she first walked back into this hall. You have it, she said. The court erupted again. Differently this time. This was not shock alone. This was the particular noise of political realignment, of 400 wolves recalculating everything they thought they knew about the shape of the evening. And through all of it, Bastion Crow crossed the hall. She knew he was coming before she heard him. She felt the specific quality of the disruption in the crowd. People moving aside the way they did for someone moving with urgency and not enough dignity. And she turned just in time to see him stop, 3 feet from her, his face stripped of everything composed. He looked at her, then at Alaric, then back at her, and then in front of the court and the candles and the ceremonial arch and the 400 witnesses and Elder Malus and the Nightborn twins and every person who had watched him dissolve their bond an hour earlier. Bastion Crow went to his knees. His hands came up, palms pressed together, in the old posture of formal supplication. Seraphina! His voice cracked on the word. I made a terrible mistake. I was pressured. My family. I did not choose this freely. Please, if you would consider Bastion. Her voice was quiet, not cold, not angry, just quiet and entirely certain. Stand up. He did not stand. I am asking you. I know what you are asking, she said, and I am telling you to stand up. Because a man on his knees in the middle of this hall is not what I need to look at right now. And because kneeling does not undo what was said at that arch. He looked up at her. His eyes were red. Whatever she had expected to feel in this moment, Triumph, grief, satisfaction. The particular bittersweet release of an old wound finally acknowledged. What she actually felt was tired. Gently, completely tired. I spent 6 years waiting for you to choose me, she said. And I understand now that you are always choosing something else. That is not something I can fix for you by accepting an apology in a public hall. It does not work that way. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned away. Not to hurt him, simply because there was nothing more to say, and she had somewhere else to be. The night was not over when the hall began to quiet. The moon ball carried through until the moon reached its highest point, a tradition that meant the court would continue its music and its whispers and its political recalibrations for another 3 hours at least. Serafina did not stay for all of it. She found a quieter corridor just off the main hall, near a row of tall windows that looked out at the open sky. And she stood there for a while in her sister's carefully made dress and let the evening settle over her. Elder Malus found her there. The old woman moved quietly for someone of her age, and she appeared beside Serafina at the window without ceremony, folding her hands and looking out at the same dark sky. They stood together for a moment without speaking. "You knew my mother's family," Serafina said finally. "It was not a question. I knew of them," Elder Malus said. "Your grandmother was a woman of considerable presence. Your mother chose a quieter path. She had her reasons, as I suspect you already know." "She was protecting us," Serafina said. "She was protecting you," the elder said gently, "from exactly the kind of attention that a bloodline name draws. She understood that the right time for that name to resurface would come, and she trusted that her daughters would know what to do with it when it did." Serafina breathed slowly. That is a great deal to leave to 2 daughters who did not know they were holding it. "Yes," Elder Malus agreed. "She was brave in the way that mothers often have to be, quietly and at great personal cost, and without any guarantee that it would matter." A pause. "It mattered," Serafina said. The elder looked at her, that ancient, still gaze that had watched more moonballs and more broken bonds and more moments of court theater than any other living person in Ashvale. She looked at Serafina the way you look at something you have been waiting a very long time to see. "Yes," she said. "I believe it did." She left then, with the same quiet dignity with which she had appeared, and Serafina was alone with the window again. She heard him before she saw him. Alaric Nightborn's footsteps had a particular quality, deliberate, unhurried. And when she looked over her shoulder, he was standing in the corridor with a careful distance between them, as if he was aware of the fact that she was a woman who had experienced enough unwanted proximity for one evening. She appreciated that. "You did not have to do what you did tonight," she said. "No," he agreed. "I did not have to. There is a difference." She recognized the echo of her sister's words from 3 days ago, and something warm moved through her. Not urgency, not the desperate pull of a fated bond, but something steadier. Something more like the recognition of a person who might be worth the time it takes to actually know them. "You said you have known about me for 2 years," she said. "Why did you not speak sooner?" He considered this. "Because you were in a bond, and I respect bonds, and because—" A slight pause, something in his composure shifting just barely. "Because I was not certain you would want to be approached. You seemed to be in the situation you had chosen." "I was," she said. "I had chosen badly. Most people do, at least once." She almost smiled. Almost. "Is that meant to be comforting?" "It is meant to be honest," he said. And then, after a moment, I would like to call on you, properly, when you are ready. There is no urgency. The declaration I made tonight carries no obligation for you. I meant that. It was for the court's awareness, not a net around your choices. She studied him. The firelight from the corridor caught the angles of his face, the patience there, the steadiness, and the thing in his eyes that was not performance and not politics, but something she was only just beginning to be able to name. You may call on me, she said, when I am ready. He nodded once, then, I will wait. And she believed him. That was the thing she had not expected. Not the power of his position, or the weight of his name, or the protection of his brothers standing guard at a ceremonial arch. She had not expected to simply believe him. But she did. She turned back to the window. She looked at the moon, hanging full and white above the Ashvale Gardens, indifferent and luminous and very, very old. She thought about her mother. She thought about Juniper at home, awake and waiting. She thought about the dress, the 3 sleepless nights, the scraps of silk gathered over a quiet year. She thought about who she was tonight, and who she would be tomorrow, and how those 2 things were going to be different now, in ways she had not yet mapped out, but was not afraid of. She had walked into this hall tonight as a woman waiting to be claimed. She was leaving as a woman who had chosen. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. Juniper found out everything in stages. First, she heard about the rejection, which Serafina told her the morning after the ball, sitting at their small kitchen table with tea going cold between them. Juniper had been very quiet through that part, and then very loud for a few minutes in a way that involved several choice words about the Crow family that Serafina chose not to repeat. Then she heard about the nightborn brothers, which took longer to explain. Then she heard about the bloodline. She was quiet again for a very long time after that part. Mom knew, she said finally. It was not a question. She knew, Serafina confirmed. Juniper looked down at her tea. Something moved across her face. Grief and pride and love all at once, tangled together the way those things always are when you find out that someone you have lost was even larger than you knew. She must have been so tired, Juniper said softly, carrying all of that, all those years, and not saying. She must have been, Serafina agreed, but she left it to us, and we are still here. Juniper looked up. Her eyes were bright. Well, she said, then we had better figure out what to do with it. And Serafina, for the first time since the night of the moonball, let herself smile. Not the controlled, careful expression she wore at court. A real one, a wide and warm and entirely her own. Already working on it, she said. Outside, the morning was gray and beginning to warm. The garden was quiet. The herbs were growing. Everything was different now. And everything was, in some essential way, she was only starting to understand, exactly as it should be. If Serafina's story moved you tonight, if you have ever stood somewhere difficult with your hands folded and your chin level and refused to let anyone see you break, then you already know what kind of strength she carries. Subscribe to this channel, turn on the notification bell. The next story is already waiting for you. Now, let's get back to the story. Thank you. The girl who stood at the edge of a hall that did not expect much from her left. It is something the court would not forget. Not because she begged, not because she broke, not because she gave anyone the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. She left because she chose to, and she was followed. That is the thing about quiet people who have learned to carry themselves well through hard things. They do not need the room to notice them. But when the room does notice, it cannot look away. Serafina Moro did not go to that moon ball looking for power. She went looking for one person to see her clearly and choose her honestly. She did not find that person where she expected, but she found what she was actually looking for. And she found herself along the way, which turned out to be the most important discovery of the whole evening. If the story stayed with you, if you are still thinking about it, still feeling it somewhere in your chest, then you are exactly who we make these stories for. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on the notification bell. We are building something here, a place for stories that respect your intelligence and your heart at the same time. Stories that leave you feeling something real. Your support makes every new story possible. We will see you at the next one. And until then, remember this: the quiet ones carry the longest memories and the most extraordinary destinies. Thank you for watching. Bye.